Hi guys, it's Christy again, and today I'm going to be painting a scuba diver model for you. And if that sounds a little bit different, that's because it is. This model is by Crooked Dice Games. They have a rule set called 7TV, which is a kind of an interesting and innovative set of rules. I suggest you take a look at it. And they also have an accompanying miniature line. A lot of their figures have kind of a 60s, 70s kind of action-adventure TV movie vibe going, and this scuba diver is really no exception. You could kind of see him working in sort of a James Bond style scenario, or in some kind of sort of stealth commando type wargaming situation. And I do realize that a model like this is pretty specialized. If, as a war gamer, you're probably only going to be using something like this in a very sort of narrow range of situations, but I thought he would be really an interesting model kind of to paint. There's some, some interesting choices you can make here, so I hope you enjoy this video. So to begin with, here are all the paints you're going to need for this model, minus, of course, the colors for the skin. This really isn't very many colors this time around, so it really emphasizes exactly what you can accomplish with an extremely limited palette. Okay, so I'm going to start off by base coating the majority of the model in black, and if you painted like me, you probably also used a black primer layer, so you may be asking, okay, well, why do I need to then go over it again with normal black? And the reason I'm doing this here is because the primer coat, sometimes the coverage isn't necessarily perfect, or some parts will have worn off. And it also tends to be a little bit shinier when it dries than the normal black, so you probably want to use that just to help matte down your surface a little bit before you start. I'm going to be starting out pretty subtle here. My very first highlight is going to be a mixture of black, German gray, and I'm going to be putting in just a hint of Prussian blue. I kind of established pretty early that I wanted to give the majority of his scuba suit kind of a slightly bluish cast. So every single layer that I add, I'm going to put in at least a little of that blue and just keep consistently adding it. This is a real subtle step from the black base, so you're going to want to apply this pretty much everywhere on the model. My next highlight layer is going to be German gray now, with again a little bit of that Prussian blue in there just to give it a slight extra bluish cast that it didn't have. Again, this is pretty subtle, but I'm going to start already focusing more in areas that would have more light hitting them, and you can see I'm kind of avoiding those areas where there's a lot of extreme shadow, like between his legs and where it's kind of bending away, and really starting to blend the color out into those areas so I can really preserve some extreme shadows in the model. I'm also deciding to keep his scuba flippers in that sort of black gray. I thought about making them a different sort of extra color, just to add something else into this. And then I decided that I think it would be more likely that the flippers would be the same color as the rest of the suit. I'm then going to start very gradually lightening my German gray and Prussian blue mix by taking some blue-gray pale, also from Vallejo, and adding that in. And at first, I'm going to keep the amount I put in very limited, and you can see I'm really being careful to blend it out into those darker areas. Because I am, at this point, I'm really going for a subtle look on the model. And you can see as I start to add in more of that blue-gray pale into my mix, and again, I'm continuing right along adding in that Prussian blue, but you can see as the whole color gets lighter, you really start to see that bluish cast come through a lot more clearly. And as I go up in color, again, I'm going to just keep really quite severely limiting the areas where I apply the colors. I'm going to be putting them real thin, real transparent, really blending them out. It's always better to be too thin and too subtle and then go back with some extra layers. That'll just look better in the end. Now, I've had some people criticize me because they find that my sort of way of painting black or dark colors gets too light or too gray. They don't like it. They want a darker, just an overall darker tone. So, and that's fine. I mean, my taste tends to run for like a slightly brighter, grayer look. But, you know, if you prefer to keep things like this darker and more subtle, I would really recommend probably stopping on the uniform after this layer of highlights is probably enough if you want a real sort of dark, really subtle look. But of course, I'm going to go farther. And this extra highlight, again, you can see I'm really now building it up on areas where I really think light would be hitting the model. You've got one advantage here if you're going for the lighter tones that you don't always have with black or gray stuff, and that is the fabric that these scuba suits is often made out of. It's kind of rubbery. It's sometimes even a little bit shiny. It tends to reflect light more than normal dark gray or black fabric would. So having these lighter tones in here, especially if you use them sort of in sort of lines to sort of indicate a reflectiveness on the surface, that's going to look good and sort of natural and nice for this, you know, this type of outfit. And now I'm going to apply my absolute final layer here. There's a lot of the blue-gray pale in here now, and I really am using this color mostly as an edge highlight. I'm going pretty strong on areas like the flippers, particularly because you've got a lot of sharp, unnatural edges, and I expect that would be kind of a rubbery surface where you get more light reflection going anyway. But on the rest of the outfit, I'm keeping where I apply this lightest layer, really to the minimum. And if you're not confident with like your blending abilities and your ability to work it into larger surfaces correctly, you can really just stick to using this as an edge highlight. So sort of around the edges of his sleeves and the cuffs of his pants and tunic, his collar, anywhere where you know there's an obvious division. It's really, and then you don't really have to think too much about blending it in or trying to create sort of a reflective kind of looking surface. Now you might have noticed that I did not use those colors to paint a lot of the straps and tubes and stuff and his mask and other parts of his equipment. I want those to be black and gray too, but I want them to have a different tone because that's going to just make everything a little bit more interesting, add a little bit more variation. So I'm now just going back in with the black again and kind of reapplying my base coat to those areas because they can easily get messed up or dirty while you're painting the rest of the scuba suit. So then my first highlight and all the sort of straps and the tubes and the mask and that little knife is just going to be pure German gray here. I haven't cut it with anything at all. And you can see if you kind of compare that to that highlight of German gray and with a bit of blue in it that I applied to the uniform earlier, it really does kind of make a difference in the tone that you kind of end up with. Now I'm going to be lightening my German gray slightly, and I'm using Vallejo Deck Tan to do that. You could do it also with various other things like sky gray or a more neutral gray shade. I like the Deck Tan because it's a very, very warm, almost sort of French gray tone. And I thought that would be interesting to use here, just to have something a little bit different from the usual, just sort of neutral gray highlighting sort of thing. This first highlight, of course, I'm starting out subtly. I'm not applying too much, and I'm just carefully using it to start brightening up all these sort of areas of the equipment. In my next mix, I add even more. By the time you get up here, you probably want to be real subtle. See, I'm really applying this kind of as an edge highlight into areas where I want it there to look like there's light hitting and some reflections. So, and the strapping is pretty easy to figure out. You know, you kind of want to run along the edges or just sort of a band of that color. As you can see, I'm applying to that big strap on the back of the scuba tank. And on the mask too, it's pretty simple. You want to apply those lighter colors kind of along the top edge on that tube running to his breathing apparatus. What you probably want to think is mostly the tube's going to be dark, and you just probably want to run sort of a lighter reflective, or sort of lighter gray, sort of reflective, sort of shiny highlight along that top of that hose, because that would be a sort of a more shiny rubber. So that's going to look good if you leave it dark, but then keep that sort of lighter stripe along the top. And I'm finishing with one last highlight that's not entirely just deck tan, but largely deck tan, I guess, against the same areas, but again, just where I want there to be this extra shininess or reflective kind of look on the surfaces. So I'm not going too heavy on especially all the straps, but you can see I'm building up quite a bit on the rubber of the mask and the hose. And also you can see on those sort of black areas that I chose to define on the spear gun. Now, you could just kind of go for an all black, gray toned sort of situation with this outfit, and a lot of modern scuba uniforms are just pretty much black and gray, and there's not really a lot of color going on there, but I wanted some color just to make the whole figure more interesting, and because we're also going for a bit more of a retro 60s, 70s vibe here. That's the style of the outfit he's wearing. I wanted to work in a color, and I'm going to be using something real bold. If you actually look at the Crooked Dice website, they painted the whole scuba uniform in orange, which is really like somehow, I don't know, that's really sort of mod 60s kind of look, and that's cool too, but I wanted to go for something a little bit more subtle. So I'm using the yellow as my accent color. I've just got some Averland Sunset here from Citadel, and I'm going to be base coating the scuba tank, the tank for his spear gun, and I'm also going to be painting some yellow stripes down the side of his pants and sleeves and his scuba suit. I don't know. I've seen this done before, but somehow I think it looks nice. It also feels a little bit kind of 60s, 70s to do this kind of striping work on here, but it makes the whole uniform just a little bit more interesting. I would use a number 0 brush for all this work just so you can have better control. And you are going to need to put on probably several coats, even though this is a base color, just because, you're applying a very bright light color over a very dark base. Once I've got a nice deep base coat, I'm going to start highlighting. In my first layer, I'm just going to take some Citadel Flash Gets Yellow, which is a really bright layering yellow, and mix it about 50-50 into the Averland Sunset. And I'm just going to start building that up gradually over all the yellow surfaces. You don't want to thin this down too much when you're doing it. Thin enough that you can work with it, but not too thin, because you want to get it as concentrated as you can as quickly as possible, especially on those little stripe areas, because you don't want to have to go back over that really more than necessary. On my scuba tanks and those big smooth round areas, you can see I sort of just start at the front, the area where the most light's going to be hitting, and sort of pull the paint out from there so that you get a little bit more of a deeper shadow towards the back and sides. And you want to follow sort of a similar approach with the tank on the spear gun. I'm now just moving on to pure Flash Gets Yellow and using basically exactly the same procedure I did on the blend from last time. And again, just building it up. You can see as I highlight the stripes, at this point I start to leave some areas where there'd be a little bit more shadow, especially where the stripe crosses any creases or folds. I leave that a little bit darker yellow and use this brighter shade to really emphasize the tops of folds or wrinkles, or things like the elbows, the sort of the sides of the calves where they bulge out, things like that. And again, this is a very transparent color, so you'll probably need to apply quite a few layers sort of to get it up to its maximum saturation. I'm now going to make one final highlight, and I'm just going to take and mix a little bit of white into the Flash Gets Yellow. You don't want to put too much in because you're going to end up then with sort of a pale, washed out shade. But if you add just a little bit of white, it'll just make it even brighter and more vibrant. So just not very much. You can kind of see on my brush what color we're talking about here. And I'm just using that as one extra bright highlight to emphasize the yellow, because when you've got a color like yellow, you really just can't make it bright enough and, have enough sort of contrast. And now I'm going to just be base coating the glass in his scuba mask using the Prussian blue. And I like to paint these sorts of glass pieces like this in sort of a blue tone, just to do it in sort of a simple gradient, blended gradient. So after I put that blue base on, I'm going to mix a bit of deck tan into my blue to lighten it. And you can see I'm just going to apply layers of that and sort of blend it out, so you end up with a lighter color towards the top and dark at the bottom. And you can add several sort of succeeding lighter layers to this until you have a nice effect. And then you want to finish off with just some pure white that you want to run really thinly in a line just kind of along the very top edge, is kind of an extra reflection. The final detail on this model is I wanted to have a few just pure sort of metal steel areas, particularly on the spear gun. So I'm base coating here with a mixture of German gray and a little bit of Vallejo Air steel. I'm also going to paint, he's got a little zipper on the front of his scuba suit. I'm going to do that in metal as well. I'm then going to add in just a bit more steel to make it a little lighter as a secondary highlight on those areas to get it nice and shiny. And then finish off with just pure Vallejo Air steel. I'm going to be very subtle with that and really apply it along the sharp edges of that spear point mostly. But you know, I wanted to have several layers here just to keep the metal areas a bit more interesting. Okay, so here is our finished retro scuba diver figure. This model is really easy to paint, but I really had a lot of fun with it. I like working with these kind of limited palettes like we had here, and because they're just kind of a lot of fun to see what you can do with just a few colors. I hope you can really get a sense of the blue cast and the gray. It worked out really nicely, I thought, mixing in all that sort of excess blue. And then when you go ahead and apply the yellow as an accent color, it really works great together because they're blue and yellow are complementary colors, and that gives a really nice effect. You could even use orange as well. It would be almost as good. If you wanted to make it perfect, if you say instead of mixing blue into your grays, as you highlight, mix in purple instead, so you had sort of a purple cast of gray, that would be really cool with orange particularly. You can do a whole bunch of things here just by sort of varying up sort of the tint to your gray and then just messing with your sort of accent color so that it goes together well. And I know this figure probably won't be of use to a lot of people. It doesn't have a lot of applications in wargaming, but I just thought it was a lot of fun, and I think it's definitely a good sort of demonstration of sort of a limited palette color study, which I think you can kind of apply to a lot of different models. So if you enjoyed this video, please, of course, like it, share it, leave me your comments with what you thought. Subscribe to my channel, please, if you haven't done so already, so you can keep up with all the latest updates. And I think that's all for now, so I will see you next time.